Hello, second grade Smarties, and welcome to Wit and Wisdom Module 2, Lesson 20. So we are starting a new book this week. So our big pizza question is, what was life like in the West for early Americans? Our pizza slice question, this is the focus question we're working on this week, is what life lesson can we learn from the story of Johnny Appleseed? And the pizza bite question, our content question we are answering today is, what do you notice and wonder about the story of Johnny Appleseed by Aliki? So, you might already know who we are reading about. What is something you already know about Johnny Appleseed? Tell me in the puzzle, what is something you already know about Johnny Appleseed? So something I know about Johnny Appleseed is that he planted a lot of apple trees. I also know that he liked to walk around barefoot and he would wear this pan on his head. All right. So I'm sure you and I probably had the same things that we know about Johnny Appleseed. Looking at the cover of our book, we are going to be reading the story of Johnny Appleseed. What do you notice about the illustration on the cover? What are some things that you are noticing on the cover of this book? I want you to tell me in the ed puzzle. So the first thing I notice is the apple. That is the biggest thing that I notice. I also notice that he has a big bag on his back and he has a smaller bag across his body. I wonder, what is in that bag? What is something that you are wondering about this cover? All right, so the story of Johnny Appleseed is a legend and a folk tale. Legend. We've read a legend before, the legend of the blue bonnet. So using our knowledge about legends, are legends informational books? Are they books that tell a story? What are they? They kind of are a mix of both, right? They're books that tell a story, usually in a magical way, that gives us true information in a different way. So with the legend of the blue bonnet, it gave us a story, a wonderful story about the legend or the story behind the blue bonnet flower in the state of Texas. So just like the legend of the blue bonnet, it tells a story about true facts, but it usually tells it in a magical or a made up way. So this story of Johnny Appleseed is a legend, but it is also a folk tale. So folk tales are stories that are told from person to person over a long period of time and sometimes changes through retelling. So for example, let's say Miss Mason has a story that started with my great, 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 great grandma. And then my great, great grandma tells that story about my great, 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 great grandma, but it's a little different. And then my great, great grandma tells it in a different way. And then my great grandma, and then my grandma, and then my mom, and then me. The story isn't going to stay exactly the same as when my great, 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 great grandma told the story, right? So folk tales are stories that are told over a long period of time, and with it being told over and over again, it sometimes changes. So the story of Johnny Appleseed is a folk tale in the sense that how the story has been told over time changes a little bit, and that's where we get these silly things that we know about Johnny Appleseed. So just like our pizza bite question said, we are going to be noticing and wondering in this story. So what I need you to do is to get yourself in a quiet space, get yourself in a comfy position, make sure that your eyes are on the screen that you are watching, your ears are opening, and you're listening and noticing for things that you see and questions that you might have about the story. So let's go ahead and get started with the story of Johnny Appleseed. Many years ago, when America was a new country, there lived a brave and gentle man named John Chapman. John loved the out of doors. He would walk for miles in the woods, among the trees and the flowers, happy and alone with his thoughts. One day, after a long walk, John sat under a tree to rest. He felt the warm sun on his back and the fresh grass tickling his toes. John took an apple from his sack and ate it, and when he had finished it, he looked in his hand at what was left. Just a few brown seeds. And John thought, if one gathered seeds and planted them, our land would soon be filled with apple trees. John Chapman lived on the frontier in Massachusetts, where the country had been settled. But every day, pioneers were leaving to travel west, where there were no homes or villages, and where the only roads were Indian trails. In their covered wagons, the pioneers made the long and dangerous journey through the wilderness. They wanted to build new lives for themselves in a new part of the country. John Chapman went too, but he did not travel in a covered wagon. He walked in his bare feet. He carried no weapons, as men did in those days, to protect themselves from wild animals in danger. He carried only a large sack on his back, filled with apple seeds, and his cooking pan on his head. As he walked, John planted seeds. He gave a small bagful to everyone he saw. Soon, everyone who knew him called him Johnny Appleseed. Sometimes Johnny stopped for many weeks helping the pioneers. They cleared the land, they built homes, they planted rows and rows of apple trees. When they were finished, Johnny walked on to help others, but he always came back to see his friends. Everyone loved Johnny Appleseed, especially the children. When Johnny rested from his planting, the children sat around him listening to all of his adventures. Johnny Appleseed walked alone. He slept out of doors, in the woods, or by the river. He met wolves and foxes, birds and deer. They were all his friends. One day, as Johnny was eating lunch, he heard a noise, and 3 little bear cubs ran from behind a tree. When the mother bear came and saw them playing together, she sat and watched. She knew Johnny Appleseed would not harm her young. Johnny met many Indians on the way. He was kind to them and gave them seeds and herbs, which they used as medicine. Although the Indians were not friendly to any white men who chased them from their homes, Johnny was their friend. Johnny did not like people to fight. He tried to make peace between the settlers and the Indians, for he believed that all men should live together as brothers. On and on Johnny walked, planting as he went. When he needed more seeds, he collected sackfuls from the cider mills. Everyone saved his apple seeds for Johnny. Many years passed. Johnny Appleseed walked on. He visited his friends and saw with pleasure the many apple trees which covered the land, and he was happy. But then, one year, there was a long, cold winter. When spring should have come, snow was still on the ground, and frost was on the trees. Johnny could not sleep or eat. He was afraid his trees would die. As he was walking among the trees one day, Johnny Appleseed fell to the ground. He was very ill. After some hours, an Indian mother and her son passed and saw Johnny lying in the cold. Quickly, the boy ran for help. Johnny was carried to their village not far away. For many days, he lay ill with fever. The Indians gave him medicine and nursed him. And one day, Johnny Appleseed opened his eyes. He smiled at his Indian friends. He knew they had saved his life. He saw that the sun was warm and the frost had left the trees. Spring had come at last, and Johnny was well again, but he never forgot his friends and went to see them often. Johnny Appleseed, the gentle pioneer, lived for many years, planting apple trees wherever he went. We can still see them today. They are large and old and heavy with apples. They are the gift Johnny Appleseed gave to his country and to you and to me. All right, so I want you to sit for a second. And I want you to think about two things that you noticed in that story. Think about two things that you saw in the story. Maybe you saw illustrations. Maybe you saw a new word you've never heard before. Maybe you saw something familiar to you. So in the Ed puzzle, I want you to tell me two things that you noticed. So two things that I noticed were the covered wagons that we learned about on the journey of a pioneer. And I also noticed that John Chapman was born in Massachusetts, and that is on the East Coast in the United States. So now I want you to think, what are two questions that you have about this story? What are two questions? What is a wonder that you have? I'm going to give you an example of a wonder that I have. Remember, wonders are questions. So we use question words like who, what, when, where, why, and how. We start those wonders with question words. So I wonder, how long did Johnny Appleseed walk across the country? How long did he walk? That's one wonder I have. I also wonder, why did Johnny Appleseed not stop at the West? Why did he not stop and make a home in the West? In the Ed puzzle, I want you to tell me two wonders that you have from reading the story. What are two questions that you have after listening to the story of Johnny Appleseed? All right. So, thinking about this book, it talked about Johnny Appleseed, who was our main character, whose original name was John Chapman. We also learn about pioneers and how Johnny Appleseed or John Chapman followed pioneers with his bag of apple seeds, but he also met Indians along the way. So, what do you wonder about Johnny Appleseed's relationship with the pioneers and the Indians? What is something that you are wondering about how Johnny Appleseed related to pioneers and Indians? What was he like around the pioneers? How did Johnny Appleseed act around the pioneers? Tell me in the Ed puzzle. So we learn in the story that Johnny Appleseed helped and was friends with the pioneers, right? He helped them grow apple trees. He helped them build homes. He told stories to the children. So he was friends and he helped the pioneers. Think about the Indians that he met. What kind of relationship did Johnny Appleseed have with the Indians? Tell me in the puzzle. So we learned that Johnny Appleseed, he gave herbs and he gave different plants to the Indians that they used for medicine, right? He was friends with the Indians. So in the past, when we have talked about the relationship with the pioneers and the Native Americans, the pioneers and the Native Americans, did they mostly have a good relationship or a bad relationship? In all of the books and the stories that we've read, we've learned that the Native Americans and the pioneers had a really rough, hard relationship, right? The Native Americans were pushed out of their homes because the pioneers broke promises, right? And there were wars, there were fights, there were battles between those two groups of people. But Johnny Appleseed, he had a good relationship with both. And he didn't want people to fight, right? So, what do you wonder about the way Johnny lives during his journey? So, we know that he made friends with everyone he lives with. Think about how he traveled. Think about the way he went in his journey. What is something you wonder about? For example, I wonder, why doesn't he wear shoes? Why doesn't he wear shoes when he travels? Or why does he not take a gun? So, what is a wonder that you have about how Johnny Appleseed traveled? Tell me in the puzzle. All right, my little smarties, we are going to finish up with a deep dive, and this should look very familiar to you. We are going to be talking about past tense verbs. So our other pizza bite question today is, how do writers use past and present tense verbs? So verbs are action words. It's something we can do. So verbs are action words in a sentence. Verbs tell us what the noun or the subject of the sentence is doing. So if you are a smarty in Miss Mason's class, we do foundations, and we have talked about suffixes. Suffixes are letters or groups of letters that change the meaning of a base word. They go at the end of a word. So in verbs, the suffixes can determine when an action happened. So thinking about what we know about suffixes, we know that we can add suffix s, suffix es, suffix ing, and ed to the ends of verbs. What suffix tells me that something happened in the past? In the puzzle, I want you to choose which suffix do I add to the end of a verb that tells me it happened in the past. We would add ed to most verbs that are past tense. So we are going to, and Miss Mason is actually going to need her computer for this part. We are going to be looking at past tense verbs. Past tense verbs are verbs that have already happened. So these are things that have already happened. So we have part of our story right here, and we are going to decide which verbs are present verbs, so which verbs are happening right now, and which verbs happened in the past. All right, so listen closely, and then we are going to pause and choose where these verbs go. One day, after a long walk, John sat under a tree to rest. All right, so sat and rest. If I sat down, did I do it right now or did I do it in the past? I did it in the past. So we're going to actually move, and I'm going to write sat. Sat means that it happened in the past. That is the past for sit. And rest. If I rest, that means I could be doing it right now, or I could do it in the past. But rest would be a present tense verb. He felt the warm sun on his back and the fresh grass tickling his toes. He felt. If he felt something, did he feel it now or in the past? Tell me in the puzzle. Felt. Is felt present tense or did it happen in the past? If I felt something, that means it happened in the past. So felt is the past for feel. And tickling, would that be a present tense or a past tense verb? That is a present tense. That ing means that it is happening right now. So tickling, that is a present tense verb. John took an apple from his sack and ate it. Ooh, took and ate. John took an apple from his sack. In the puzzle, I want you to tell me, is the word took present or past? If I took something, did I take it right now or did I already take it? Took. That is a past tense verb. What about ate? If I ate something, did I do it now or in the past? It means I did it in the past. Ate is a past tense verb. And when he had finished, he looked in his hand at what was left, just a few brown seeds. So looked. What do you notice about the word looked? It has that suffix ed. So if it has that suffix ed, is looked a past tense or a present tense verb? Did it happen in the past or is it happening right now? Tell me in the puzzle. It means it already happened, so it is past tense. All right, we are going to move on. And John thought, if one gathered seeds and planted them, our land would soon be filled with apple trees. I want us to look at the word planted. In the Ed Puzzle, I want you to tell me, is planted a present tense verb? Is it happening right now? Or did it already happen? Planted. Tell me in the Ed Puzzle. It means it already happened, so it is past tense. All right, so we're going to pause right there because I want us to look at some of our past tense verbs. If you look at some of our past tense verbs, what do you notice about them? When we hear those verbs, we know that they happened in the past, but the ones that are in blue, what do they not have at the end of them that most past tense verbs have? Because in the last slide, we talked about how most verbs that happen in the past have an ed at the end. Do these words have ed at the end? No. So tomorrow's lesson, we are going to be talking about irregular past tense verbs. Go ahead and say irregular past tense verb. So irregular past tense verbs are past tense verbs, but they're spelled differently from the base word. So in look, in plant, in looked, that ed is saying t, but it still has the base word look. In planted, that ed says id, but it still has the base word plant. So verbs are very important. And depending on what verb you use, it can change the meaning of when something happened. So when we are writing, it is so important that we use present and past tense verbs correctly. All right, Smarties, that is it for lesson 20 in Wit and Wisdom. As always, keep that growth mindset. Good learners do hard things. I will see you tomorrow with lesson 21, and happy learning, second grade Smarties.